About 18 months ago, a very, very dear friend of mine checked herself into a rehabilitation and alcohol and drug treatment center, and she reported out that experience in texts and messages to me. As she went through that experience, she experienced, as she began to come off the drugs, she experienced the withdrawals, and it was not pretty. She experienced depression. She experienced loss. Who am I now without that? She experienced this almost death of self, what she'd known. It kind of reminds me of my dad when he retired. My dad experienced the same thing. When he retired, he was depressed. He experienced loss. He didn't understand who he was. There was kind of a death. I wonder what's harder, to recover from an addiction to a substance or an addiction to work. My dad was a workaholic. His life was, his identity was wrapped up in his capacity to earn a living. And I wonder what's easier. What was it like for you to retire? To give up what you had to give up? Some women give up their roles as mothers when their children leave. Right? What's to become of me now? Who am I now when I'm not a mom? Who am I now that I'm not an engineer or a realtor? Or who am I now if I'm not a librarian? I wonder if those identities are addictions. It's a question that I live with. And then I wonder if we throw that word around too often. You know, I'm addicted to coffee. I gotta have my grandkid fix. I wonder if we throw that word around. There was an entire event in New West yesterday. It was a festival of recovery. There was live music on the streets. There was lots of booths where recovery centers and healing programs presented their wares. There was free coffee everywhere. And the streets were packed. I picked up a brochure on the description of addictions. A friend of mine said, an addiction is something that takes too much space in your brain that makes your life unmanageable. Something that we're attached to that makes our life unmanageable. And this brochure picked up the symptoms of that. I'd like to think that, I think that addictions are anything that take us out of the world, to see the world the way it actually is. I think anything that takes us from our capacity to maintain our gaze on the world the way it is, so that we might find the thing that we can do. Anything that takes us out of that might be an addiction. Anyway, the list is, what are the symptoms of an addiction? And this is what this article said. Am I taking more, and let's use the word drug for right now. Am I taking more drugs because the old amount doesn't do much for me anymore? Have I ever faced or narrowly avoided a legal problem, missed a deadline, or let go of a time constraint because of my use of drugs? Would I prefer to use drugs than anything else? Do I use drugs to alleviate the symptoms I would have if I didn't when I don't use them? Do I ever promise myself or my loved ones that I will stop, and then I fail to do that? Do I ever realize that I've forgotten something? Do I lie to family and friends about the use of drugs? Well, here's what I think you could do. In any one of those questions, you could drop in any number of activities that takes us out of the world, that takes too much space in our brains, that makes our lives unmanageable. It could be work, it could be television, it could be video games, could be gambling, could be knitting, could be news, could be movies, alcohol, food, violence, guns, sex, could be anything. You could drop any one of those in. And if it makes your life unmanageable, could it be an addiction? I wonder about that. The text from Matthew's Gospel is really dense. Bruce, could we go back to it? It's really dense, and lots of it is really hard to swallow. And so I'm going to spend a little time in the text to help us address the question of what is an addiction and what might I do about it. We're going to return, for starters, to Matthew's Gospel. Here, Jesus is simply saying his disciples have just come back from the mission field. They didn't think that they had the capacity to do anything. And they came back and had this incredible experience of healing people and teaching people and restoring people to their communities. And they were doing things that Jesus did. And Jesus simply says, disciples aren't greater than their masters, but they're not less than their masters. Why shouldn't you learn what I teach you? That's basically what that first paragraph's about. Right? Why shouldn't you learn? There will be other, in there will be other prophets out there who will keep secrets from you. There will be other prophets who are saying, do it in silence, do it hidden. And Jesus says, no, shout it from the rafters, from the rooftops. Keep nothing secret, including what might be an addiction. Right? Don't be afraid of those who can kill the body, but can't kill the soul, he says. Let's go. Bruce. Instead, be afraid of the one who can destroy both body and soul. Addictions do that. Keep going. Because God says, you're a miracle, as Eric said, you're a miracle. Even the hairs in your head are numbered. You cannot fail. You can't lose this. I love you, says God. And then, here's the thing about this gospel. It separates us from our families. Our families expect us to show up in a particular way. And when we've met the gospel of Jesus Christ, we show up differently. And that naturally separates us. Especially if our families expect us to show up in the broken ways we've always shown up. The gospel of Christ says, your life comes back to you. And all these things that you bury yourself in, every single one of them is a gift to you, to use in moderation. Because the life I give you is abundant. Right? And keep one more, and that's what that last paragraph, those who find their lives will lose them. And those who lose their lives because of me will find them. Do you know this text is like the first 2 steps in the 12-step program? The first step is to acknowledge that you are powerless. The second step is to give your life over to that which has more power. Those are the first 2 steps. And look where how they show up in the gospel. Look how they show up in the gospel. Give your life to me, and Jesus promises that your life will come back. So, that's what's going on in the gospel today. Micah shows us how. Micah teaches us how. I don't want your burnt offerings. I don't want your showy displays. I don't want you to do any of those big showy things. I simply want you to seek justice, love kindness, and walk humbly. The word humble comes from the root word humus. Humus is what? It's soil. It's compost. It's the grittiness, the dirtiness, the soil of life. To be humble is to be grounded, to be planted, to be rooted in the person that you've been created to be. Seek justice, love kindness, and walk fully as the person you are. Humility is an honest assessment of self, the good stuff and the not so good stuff. Micah shows us how this gospel plays out. So, what do we do with the messages that bombard your everyday existence? You can't turn on a TV or a radio. You can't walk into the mall for coffee. You can't pick up a magazine or a newspaper in your doctor's office without being confronted with the symptoms of the crisis we've been exploring these past 4 weeks. Indeed, being confronted with the cries of our time. We witness the crisis in political leadership, in any kind of leadership sometimes. We witness the crisis in the way we relate to each other. We surround ourselves with the people who agree with us. We can't stomach those who don't agree with us. We are faced with a crisis of addictions, whether it's substance or stuff that takes us out of God's world. And finally, the entire ecological crisis and the deadly threat to creation itself. What do we do with all of that? Like a bad accident, we don't look away. We can't get enough. We want to grab onto every bit of bad news that we can see. It's going on for us, and we're wallowed in it. It happens to us. Why? What's going on that we can't get enough of that? We wring our hands. It's terrible. Some of us are even sitting here wishing we could check out early. Right? How many times have I heard older people say to me, the world is so much more complex. When I was younger and had some agency in the world, the problems were not nearly this complex. They're lamenting the world they're leaving behind, and their sadness as they think about their own death. What I know to be true is that the gospel of Jesus Christ is now more important. It's more critical that it be spoken than at any other time in my life, certainly, and in the life of my children. A gospel that says who you are is perfect, exactly how you are. There's nothing you need to do to live in this beautiful world. That's the gospel. I speak from a very deeply personal place. When we give ourselves to Christ, that's what Jesus is saying to his disciples. This is a very intimate conversation with his disciples. They've just come back. It's just the 13 of them. He says to them, those who give up their life for my sake and the sake of the gospel will get it back. What does that mean? It means when you give your life to the light, when you give your life to the living Christ, you will completely, your life comes back to you. You are fuller, richer, more vibrant, more hopeful, more joyful. You are able to hold and withstand the cries of our time. When you do that, it's better than sex, it's better than drugs, it's better than food, it's better than knitting, it's better than anything. All of those things fit into a life of balance when you live your life in Christ. That's the gospel. Micah makes it easy. Seek justice, love kindness, walk humbly in giving your life to Christ. We do that in our baptism. We turn our lives over in baptism. We say, I'm stepping onto the path of Christ to follow this Jewish carpenter. I'm turning my life. We do that in baptism, as I said. And we make that opportunity available to lots of people. So today, if you would like to reconnect to the Christ of life, I'm pouring water into the font for you to remember your baptism. I invite you to come forward as you feel like it, as you are able, whenever it feels comfortable, and come in and splash in this water, make your face wet, and make sure that you sign yourself with a cross. If you'd like me to sign you with a cross, I'll stand here and I'll do that for you. But you haven't heard me ask you to play, but if you could help us with some music to actually, if you'd like to come forward. And for those who have not been baptized, for those who haven't got a clue what I'm talking about, and you would like to know what it means to kind of give your life to Christ, I will meet with you in the sacred space after worship today. And we'll talk about what that means very briefly. But if you'd like to come forward and recommit yourself by remembering your baptism, please make yourself wet and mark yourself with a cross.